The crimson sun of Kepler-7 cast long shadows across the crystalline mines where humanity's forgotten children labored in chains. Jackson Reed wiped sweat from his brow, his calloused hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion that ran through his lean frame. For 3 years, he had been just another face among the thousands of human slaves mining precious Kyber crystals for the Zarn Dominion. The alien overseers floated above the mining pits on their anti-gravity platforms, their serpentine bodies coiled with casual menace. Their scales shifted from deep purple to angry red when displeased, a warning system every slave learned to read within their first week, or didn't survive to see a second. "Keep moving, flesh worms," hissed Vector, the chief overseer, his 4 arms gesturing imperiously. "The Emperor's shipyards require twice this output by cycle's end." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes down. The Zarn believed humans were barely sentient, useful only for grunt labor in environments too dangerous for their precious robotic workforce. They had no idea that the quiet slave before them had once been Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reed of Earth's Deep Space Engineering Corps, before Earth fell, before the neural implant in his brain had gone dormant, before everything he'd known turned to ash. A soft touch on his shoulder made him turn. Maya Chen worked beside him, her dark eyes filled with the same carefully concealed intelligence that had first drawn him to her in the slave quarters. When the Zarn couldn't see, she was brilliant and fierce. Here in the mines, she played the part of a broken woman perfectly. "Shift change soon," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the grinding of mining equipment. Jackson nodded, allowing himself a moment to study her face. Even exhausted and covered in crystal dust, she was beautiful. More importantly, she was alive, and in this hell, that was miracle enough. Their stolen moments together in the darkness of the slave quarters were the only thing keeping his sanity intact. A child's cry echoed across the mining floor. Jackson turned to see young Tommy Voss, barely 12 years old, struggling with a crystal extractor twice his size. The boy had been separated from his parents during a raid on the outer colonies. Now he was just another work unit in the Dominion's vast machine. "Please," Tommy gasped, his small hands shaking as he tried to lift the heavy tool. "I just need a moment." Vector's platform swooped down like a predatory bird. "Weakness is not tolerated," the overseer declared, his plasma weapon humming to life. "No." Jackson started forward, but Maya's hand on his arm stopped him. Moving would mean death for both of them. The energy bolt struck Tommy in the chest. The child crumpled, his young life snuffed out as casually as stepping on an insect. Something inside Jackson's mind went silent, then, like a dam bursting, it roared back to life. Pain exploded behind his eyes as neural pathways that had been dormant for years suddenly blazed with activity. The quantum processor embedded in his brain stem, a relic of Earth's most classified military program, came online with a sound like digital thunder. Data streams flooded his consciousness, security protocols, weapon systems, the entire facility's network laid bare before him like a three-dimensional map. For the first time in 3 years, Jackson Reed smiled. The revolution was about to begin. Chapter 2, Awakening. The neural implant's reactivation hit Jackson like lightning coursing through his veins as he knelt beside Tommy's lifeless body. Data cascaded across his vision, security codes, guard rotations, structural weaknesses in the facility's defenses. The Zarn had built their prison assuming their slaves were helpless. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. "Jackson," Maya's voice seemed distant, filtered through the digital symphony now playing in his head. "Your eyes, they're glowing." He blinked, forcing the implant's interface to dim. The last thing he needed was to expose himself before he understood the full extent of his restored capabilities. "I'm fine," he whispered, though his hands trembled with newfound power. That night in the cramped slave quarters, where hundreds of humans huddled on metal shelves that served as beds, Jackson began his work. While others slept, he interfaced wirelessly with the facility systems, his consciousness slipping through networks like a ghost, invisible to the Zarn's primitive security protocols. First, he adjusted the environmental controls, nothing dramatic, just enough to make the guards slightly uncomfortable. Then he began mapping every system, every weakness, every potential weapon. "You're different," Maya said, lying beside him on their shared sleeping pad. Her fingers traced the scar at the base of his skull where the implant had been surgically installed years ago. "Since yesterday, you're more." Jackson turned to face her, studying the worry lines around her eyes. In the dim light, she looked even more beautiful than he remembered. "I'm still me, Maya. But I'm also who I used to be." She pressed closer, her body warm against his in the cold dormitory. "Who were you? Really? Someone who can get us out of here," he cupped her face gently. "Someone who can make them pay for what they did to Tommy. To all of us." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of desperation and hope. In this place of death and suffering, their love was an act of rebellion itself. Over the following weeks, Jackson began his campaign. A conveyor belt would malfunction here, a security camera would develop blind spots there. The Zarn blamed equipment failure, never suspecting sabotage from their primitive slaves. But Jackson's greatest discovery came when he tapped into the facility's communication array. Hidden in the quantum noise between star systems, he found them, fragments of encrypted signals, coded messages, the digital whispers of the human resistance. Earth might have fallen, but humanity's spirit lived on in scattered cells across the galaxy. Former soldiers, scientists, engineers, all pretending to be broken while secretly coordinating. The network was vast, patient, and utterly invisible to their alien oppressors. Jackson smiled as he began transmitting his own carefully coded messages, identifying himself with his old military call sign, Ghost 77. The responses came within days. There were others like him, enhanced soldiers presumed dead. They had been waiting, planning, preparing for this moment. His work didn't go entirely unnoticed. Thane Chorus, a young Zarn guard with unusually pale scales, began watching him with curious rather than hostile eyes. Unlike the other guards, Thane seemed to actually see the slaves as individuals rather than work units. "You carry yourself differently than the others," Thane said one day, approaching Jackson during a shift break. The alien's translated voice held a thoughtful tone. "Like a predator pretending to be prey." Jackson kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "Perhaps not." Thane's forearms folded in what Jackson recognized as the Zarn equivalent of crossed arms. "But I wonder, how long does a predator remain patient before it remembers its nature?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither dared voice openly. That night, Maya brought news that changed everything. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. Jackson's world tilted. A child. Their child. In this place of horror, they had somehow created new life. "We're getting out of here," he said, pulling her into his arms. "All of us. I promise you that." As he held her, his implant quietly began uploading a new virus into the facility's network, one that would remain dormant until he chose to activate it. When that time came, the Zarn would learn that their slaves had been far from helpless. The ghost was awake, and he was ready to haunt them. The opportunity Jackson had been waiting for arrived with the monthly inspection tour. High Commander Thole, one of the Dominion's most feared military leaders, would be reviewing the facility's productivity reports in the Central Command Center, the most heavily secured area of the complex. "This is insane," Maya whispered as they lay together the night before his infiltration mission. Her pregnancy was beginning to show, a small curve beneath her worn slave tunic that filled Jackson with both fierce protectiveness and desperate hope. "If they catch you." "They won't." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, tasting the salt of unshed tears. "When this is over, our child will be born free." Their lovemaking that night was tender and desperate, two souls clinging to each other in the darkness. Maya's hands traced the muscles of his back as he moved above her, both of them trying to memorize every touch, every whispered endearment, knowing it might be their last. "I love you," she breathed against his ear. "Come back to me." "Always," he promised. The next morning, Jackson volunteered for the maintenance crew preparing the command center for inspection, a duty usually reserved for the most compliant slaves. His 3 years of perfect obedience had earned him that reputation. As the Zarn officers gathered in the central chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the Dominion's vast territory, Jackson worked silently in the maintenance tunnels beneath their feet. His implant interfaced with the quantum core that powered the entire facility, uploading the virus he had spent weeks perfecting. Through the security feeds, he watched High Commander Thole address the facility's staff. Productivity must increase by 40%, the massive Zarn declared, his crimson scales rippling with authority. The Emperor's expansion into the Outer Rim requires more resources. Work the humans harder. Their comfort is irrelevant. That was when Jackson activated his masterpiece. Every screen in the command center flickered and died. Emergency lighting bathed the room in hellish red as the virus spread through the Dominion's military network like wildfire, jumping from facility to facility across quantum communication links. Alarms shrieked as blast doors sealed the Zarn officers inside the command center. Jackson's voice echoed through the facility speakers, his words broadcast simultaneously to every Dominion installation within 100 light-years. "My name is Jackson Reed, Ghost 77, formerly of the Earth Defense Corps. For 3 years, you have called us slaves. You have tortured us, murdered our children, broken our spirits. Today, you learn the price of underestimating humanity." Across Kepler 7, cell doors opened as his virus overrode security protocols. In the slave quarters, Maya organized the evacuation, leading women and children toward the emergency shuttles while men grabbed improvised weapons. The uprising was not limited to their facility. On mining world after mining world, similar scenes played out as sleeper agents activated their own hidden programs. Former Earth military personnel, scientists, and engineers threw off their slave disguises and struck with coordinated precision. Thane Chorus found himself caught between worlds as his fellow guards called for backup. When he saw human children running through the corridors, his training demanded he stop them. Instead, he stepped aside. "Go," he told Maya as she passed with a group of pregnant women. "The shuttle bay is clear." She paused, studying his pale scales with calculating eyes. "Why?" "Because this is wrong," Thane said simply. "It has always been wrong." The battle raged for hours. Human slaves, armed with stolen Zarn weapons and guided by Jackson's tactical overlays transmitted through their communication implants, fought with the desperation of the condemned and the precision of trained soldiers. In the command center, Jackson faced High Commander Thole in single combat. The Zarn warrior was larger, stronger, and armed with plasma claws that could slice through steel. But Jackson had spent 3 years studying their weaknesses, and his implant gave him superhuman reflexes. He moved like liquid lightning, striking nerve clusters that paralyzed the alien's limbs one by one. When Thole finally fell, Jackson leaned close to his ear. "Tell your emperor, humanity bows to no empire." By dawn, 12 Zarn facilities across the sector had fallen. Thousands of human slaves were free, and the legend of the Ghost spread through rebel networks like electronic wildfire. As Jackson reunited with Maya in the shuttle bay, holding her close as she wept with relief, neither of them noticed Thane Chorus quietly boarding one of the evacuation ships. The young Zarn had made his choice. The revolution had begun, and there would be no turning back. Chapter 4, The Emperor's Wrath. Emperor Zephus received the news of the slave uprising while dining on crystallized starlight in his obsidian palace. The ancient Zarn ruler's scales shifted from deep gold to furious crimson as holographic reports detailed the coordinated attacks across 12 star systems. "Impossible," he hissed, his 6 eyes focusing on the tactical display. "Humans are barely sentient. They lack the cognitive capacity for such coordination." My emperor, his military advisor, General Vaxim, lowered his serpentine head in submission. The one they call the Ghost appears to be enhanced. Our scientists believe he possesses some form of quantum neural interface. Then he dies, Zephus declared, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. Issue the Crimson Decree. Every human in the galaxy is now an enemy combatant. Show no mercy. 3 months later, aboard the stolen Zarn cruiser Defiance, Maya gripped Jackson's hand as another contraction racked her body. They had converted the ship's medical bay into a makeshift maternity ward, with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former trauma surgeon who had spent 5 years disguised as a simple mining slave, serving as midwife. "The baby's coming," Elena announced, her steady hands guiding new life into a universe at war. Jackson held Maya's gaze, his implant dimmed to avoid frightening her with the digital glow. "You're incredible," he whispered, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. "The strongest person I've ever known." "Just stay with me," Maya gasped between contractions. "Promise me you won't do anything heroic until after." Her words were cut off by another wave of pain, and moments later, their son entered the world with a cry that seemed to echo through the ship's corridors like a declaration of hope. "He's perfect," Jackson breathed, cradling the tiny bundle while tears streamed down his face. The baby's eyes, Maya's eyes, gazed up at him with an awareness that seemed almost otherworldly. "What should we name him?" Maya asked, exhausted but glowing with maternal pride. "David. After my father." Jackson gently placed their son in Maya's arms. "David Chen Reed. The first free human born in this sector." Their moment of joy was shattered by proximity alarms. Through the ship's viewports, they could see the massive Zarn battle fleet emerging from hyperspace, dozens of dreadnoughts surrounding the refugee convoy like predators circling wounded prey. On the bridge, Thane Chorus stood beside the human tactical officer, his pale scales now bearing the scars of his defection. The Zarn military had branded him a traitor, and there was no going back. 37 ships, he reported grimly, led by the Emperor's personal flagship, Eternal Dominion. "They're not here to capture prisoners." Jackson arrived on the bridge moments later, his implant already interfacing with the ship's systems. The quantum processor in his brain had evolved during their months of running, growing stronger with each connection, each hack, each impossible victory against overwhelming odds. "Can we outrun them?" Maya asked, still holding baby David. "Not with the civilian transports," Jackson replied, his consciousness already reaching out to touch the enemy fleet's networks. What he found made his blood freeze. "They're going to use plasma bombs. Scorched earth. They mean to kill every human in this system." The battle was brief and brutal. The refugee fleet, composed mainly of converted cargo ships and mining vessels, stood no chance against military-grade Zarn warships. One by one, the human ships were picked off by plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes.